Advocate Tejas Shah, Chairman Catering Committee, Mr. Hiren Patel, Co-Chairman Kit Committee, Advocate Manish Joshi, Co-Chairman Kit Committee, Advocate Sunil Keshwani, Co-Chairman Media Committee, along with our esteemed speaker, Advocate Uchit Sheth, sir. Please give them a huge round of applause to all the dignitaries on the dais. To formally welcome our eminent speaker, I request Advocate Tejas Shah, Chairman of Catering Committee, to felicitate our esteemed speaker, Advocate Uchit Sheth, with a book. And I would also request Tejas sir to felicitate Uchit sir with a memento as well. And also put our hands together for our speaker, CA Dr. Avinash Podar, who is also with us right now. So please give him a big hand. So before I invite Uchit Sheth sir onto the podium, I would like to introduce him. Advocate Uchit Sheth sir is a successful advocate practicing in Gujarat High Court, the Supreme Court and Tribunal on Taxation Matters. His academic achievement consists of 14th rank in ICAI examination with gold medal in indirect taxation. He has appeared in various cases involving important issues of interpretation of tax laws as well as constitutional violations of various provisions of tax laws. He has rendered his services as an editor of sales tax journals for the year 18 and 19 and 17-18. He has delivered numerous lectures and presented papers on sales tax, VAT, GST at seminars and refresher courses organized by different professional associations and ICAI. He has also participated as trustees for brain trust sessions in various seminars. Let's, with a huge round of applause, welcome Shri Uchit Sheth. Sir, I invite you for your talk.
Of this conclave and all the delegate friends. Now the topic for today allotted to me is recent controversial judgments of the High Court and Supreme Court on GST. Now, why this topic assumes significance? Before we undertake the exercise of technically analyzing certain judgments, we should be aware that Article 141 of the Constitution of India declares that the law declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all courts within the territory of India. So, ordinarily, a law is enacted by the Parliament or the state legislature. But even if a law is declared by the Supreme Court of India, it is binding on all courts. So, commonly what we refer to as judge-made law. So, although the law would be made by the Parliament, it would be interpreted by the court, it would be developed by the court, and that will also be binding. So, if we want to understand a subject, equal weightage needs to be given to the draft of the legislation as well as its interpretation by a court of law. In fact, I would quote Lord Denning, who was a renowned lord of the House of Lords in England. He said that a judge must not alter the material of which the act is woven, but he can and should iron out the creases. So, a judge not only interprets the law, he also irons out the creases in the law and therefore develops the law. And therefore, a judgment of a competent court, and especially a constitutional court, assumes immense significance. So that is about the Supreme Court. Now if you look at the High Court, unlike Article 141, there is no article in the Constitution which says that it is a law declared by the High Court is binding. No, there is no article. In fact, in earlier days, a controversy arose whether a law declared by the High Court is binding only on the parties or also on others, because there is no article like 141 which says that a law declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all. Supreme Court under Article 141 declared that if we declare that High Court orders are not binding on everyone within its territory, then there will be anarchy and chaos. So even though there is no specific article declaring that High Court judgments are binding on all, it is a judge-made law that if once a jurisdictional High Court declares a law, it is binding on everyone. So if suppose if we look at it from the perspective of taxing statutes, if in a particular SSE, if say the Gujarat High Court declares a particular law, that is binding on all the authorities, all the tribunals, even in case of other SSEs. So the authority or the tribunal cannot say that no, it is binding only on the SSE and the department in that case. It is not like advance ruling. The High Court is not an advance ruling authority. Where in advance ruling, the statute itself makes it clear that advance ruling will be only binding on that particular SSE and the departmental authority in that case. Unlike that, in the case of a judgment by a constitutional court, it is binding on everyone. So High Court will be binding within its territory, Supreme Court will be binding across the country. Suppose if it is a judgment by a non-jurisdictional High Court, suppose the SSE is in Gujarat, Gujarat High Court has not yet taken a view on a particular issue. Suppose Bombay High Court takes a particular view, still there are judgments to the effect that will also have a strong persuasive value, particularly if it is a central legislation like Income Tax Act or the Central Goods and Services Tax Act. So in a nutshell, the idea behind this introduction is that any judgment by a constitutional court has general utility. It is not a specific case-to-case judgment, and therefore, while analyzing the effect of any statute, more particularly the effect of a technical statute like the GST law, we need to be aware of all the important judgments which are delivered under the particular law. Now, the first judgment which I start my analysis is the judgment of the High Court in the case of VKC Footsteps Private Limited versus Union of India, 81 GSTR 66 Gujarat. Now, why I start with this judgment? Because again, I will deal with the issue which is decided by the judgment, but this will also have an important role in understanding the effect of any judgment in general. So, we will come to that a bit later. But for the time being, in this particular, this judgment is in fact very widely publicized, so probably most of you would be aware of it. The issue at hand was that under the GST law, refund is admissible only under section 54. There is only one provision which deals with grant of refund. Section 54 subsection 3 says that refund will be admissible in respect of unutilized input tax credit in two circumstances. One, zero rated supplies, that is exports or supplies to SEZ units. Two, if it is on account of the rate of tax on inputs being higher than output supplies. So the phraseology used in the provision is the rate of tax on inputs should be higher than the rate of tax on output supplies. If that be so, then the provision says refund is admissible of unutilized input tax credit. Now, while framing the rule under this particular section, initially the government felt that this would entitle the SSE to refund of input tax credit pertaining to inputs as well as input services. So suppose I purchase raw material having higher rate of tax, that would also get included. Suppose I avail services such as transportation or let's say unloading, loading, packing, etc. Even that would be included. In 2018, the rule was retrospectively amended to provide that the refund will be restricted only to inputs, that is only goods. So if you have input services in respect of which there is unutilized input tax credit, then the government by way of an amendment to the rule said that you will not be entitled to refund. And they came out with a circular clarifying that this amendment is being done to align the rule with the section. This amendment and the circular was challenged before the High Court in number of petitions. Principal argument being that ultimately the section requires refund of unutilized input tax credit. If you look at the definition of input tax credit, it covers both goods as well as services. Secondly, when the proviso to that section says that rate of tax on inputs should be higher than output supplies, inputs should be read in conjunction with supplies. So the provision should be read as input supplies exceeding output supplies. And therefore, considering that aspect also, refund should be granted of the entire amount of tax credit. Particularly considering the fact that ultimately the objective of the provision is to ensure that for cases where people are not able to utilize the credit because of lower tax rate on outputs, that input tax credit does not get stuck in the ledger. Gujarat High Court in VKC footsteps accepted this argument and it read down the rule and said that refund is admissible of the entire amount of input tax credit, including that relating to services. So insofar as Gujarat is concerned, for the time being at least, Gujarat High Court holds the field. Now subsequently, and now this is where it would get interesting and it would also help us in analyzing the effect of such judgments. Subsequently, Madras High Court in the case of TVL Transtonstroy Afcons JV 2020-43 GSTL 433 takes a 2020-43 GSTL 433 Madras. It takes a contrary view. It takes into consideration the judgment of the Gujarat High Court, but it disagrees. It says that no, it is a taxing statute, it is to be strictly construed. So if the section says that no, give the refund only if the rate of tax on inputs is exceeding output supplies, you have to read the definition, the term inputs as it stands, as per the definition clause. You forget everything else. We will hold that you can get refund only qua goods. So Madras High Court disagrees and it says that you are not entitled to refund of input tax credit pertaining to services. So insofar as the state of Madras is concerned or state of Tamil Nadu is concerned, again situation will be very clear that there any assessee will not be entitled to that refund because the jurisdictional High Court says that no, you are not entitled to refund. Now again the grey area arises as to what would be the situation in other states, because Gujarat declares in Gujarat that no, the rule is ultra virus and therefore you are entitled to refund. The Madras High Court in Tamil Nadu declares that no, you are not entitled to refund. According to me, still on this subject there is no authoritative pronouncement, particularly because what happens is that in case where a section is held to be ultra virus, ordinarily the state or the union will challenge it before the Supreme Court. So as and when the Supreme Court decides which of the two judgments is correct, that would hold the field across the country. So as of today, according to me, while in Gujarat, unless there is an adverse order from the Supreme Court, in Gujarat, Gujarat High Court will continue to hold the field and therefore the authority is bound to follow that Gujarat High Court judgment. Madras, the authority again is bound to follow the Madras High Court. Other areas are concerned, because it is a question of virus of a rule, according to me, the Gujarat High Court will not have an effect on the other states, particularly when the government is not accepting the judgment. It has already filed an SLP before the Supreme Court. So insofar as the other states are concerned, there will be a dichotomy, there will be a problem, but the authority will not be in a position to grant refund on the basis of a Gujarat High Court judgment, particularly where it is not a question of interpretation of law. Suppose it was a question of legal interpretation of a statutory provision. Then the authority of another state could have chosen to follow Gujarat High Court and grant the refund. Here is not a question of interpretation of a statutory provision, it is the question of virus of a provision, where Gujarat High Court takes a view that the rule is ultra virus the statute. In such circumstances, the other authority will not be in a position to grant refund pursuant to the Gujarat High Court judgment. So that is number one. Second, what if this Gujarat High Court judgment gets stayed by the Supreme Court? What would be the position in such circumstances? This is a hypothetical question. If it gets stayed, then obviously on the basis of that judgment, the authority for the time being will not grant refund. It will say that we will wait for the Supreme Court to decide now. We will not grant refund. The correctness of such a stand may be doubtful, because even if a judgment is stayed, that does not mean that it ceases to be binding. But the practical issue will be that they will keep the proceedings pending. So if they keep the proceedings pending, we will not be able to do anything in the matter. But the more interesting question arises, what if in a case the refund is already granted pursuant to the Gujarat High Court judgment and then it gets stayed by the Supreme Court? Suppose an authority following VKC footsteps in Gujarat has already sanctioned the refund, already granted the refund pursuant to the Gujarat High Court judgment, and then that judgment gets stayed by the Supreme Court, then according to me, that would not mean that that refund has to be given back to the authority. Again, there are lines of judgment on this. One is Calcutta High Court Piyush Kanti Chaudhary. It is a non-tax matter. It is an unreported judgment. And Delhi High Court Space Telelink Limited, taking a view that merely because a judgment is stayed, that does not mean that the reasoning of judgment is removed. There is no judgment of the Supreme Court which is contrary to the judgment of the High Court. The High Court judgment is stayed, therefore the parties in that litigation may not be able to take benefit or give effect to that judgment. But that does not mean that because the High Court judgment is stayed, therefore something which has already accrued to another SSE, that has to be given back based on that stay order. That would have to be given back only if the High Court judgment gets reversed. So that is another point of practical relevance, because this is just one example. This keeps happening off and on, that there is a favorable tribunal or High Court judgment. Maybe benefit has already been given on the basis of such tribunal and High Court judgment. Subsequently, based on stay by a superior forum, the authority comes and says that now deposit, because that judgment which you were relying upon has already been stayed. That is not a correct stand. Merely staying of the order or judgment will not mean that that judgment has been effaced from its existence. So this was the first judgment. Next, I have just divided the judgments into categories for ease of understanding. Next, we move to two judgments which are important from the practical perspective. One, relating to detention and seizure of goods in transit, and two, regarding power of arrest during search. We start with the first judgment, Synergy Fertichem Private Limited versus State of Gujarat, 76 GSTR 81 Gujarat. Now, if we look at the provisions in question, under the GST law, there are two competing provisions allowing the authority to detain or confiscate the goods while they are in transit, while they are in movement. So suppose A is supplying goods to B. During the transit, if a check post officer, if a competent authority has some doubt regarding the transaction, then there are two provisions which are relevant, which are applicable. We'll come to it a bit later, but at least there are two provisions which are relevant. One, section 129, and two, section 130. Section 129 says that if the movement of goods is in contravention of the provisions of the Act, then the goods and the vehicle can be detained. And they are to be released if there are three categories given, but the general category is if the owner of the goods comes forward and pays tax and penalty equivalent to 100% of the tax. So if there is movement of goods from one place to another, if it is in contravention of any provision of the Act, then section says that they can be detained and they are to be released on payment of tax and penalty. Then subsection 2, 3, 4, 5, they are procedural provisions. We straight away jump to subsection 6, which says that if the tax and penalty as determined under section 129 is not paid within 14 days from the date of detention, then confiscation proceedings will be initiated under section 130. So 129 says if contravention, they can be detained, they have to be released on payment of tax and penalty. If tax and penalty is not paid, then confiscation proceedings will be initiated under 130. 130 says that if the goods are supplied or received in contravention of the provisions of the Act with the intention to evade payment of tax. There are other categories also, but for the time being we stick to that one point of movement. With the intention to evade payment of tax, then the goods are liable for confiscation. So 129 talks about detention or seizure. So it is simply seizure of the goods. The possession of the goods is seized by the authority. 130 talks of confiscation. So if the goods are confiscated, then the title to the goods transfers to the government. So it is a much more harsher provision compared to detention or seizure. Now what the issue which cropped up before the High Court was, it was noticed that across the state, any deficiency in the document accompanying the goods, there were cases where e-way bill was not there, there were cases where maybe the invoice was not there, there were cases where both the documents were there but there was some discrepancy in either of the documents. In any which case, the authority took a stand that no, this is with the intention to evade payment of tax, so I will not resort to 129 at all, I will straight away issue a confiscation notice under 130. So what used to happen was that wherever there is a document discrepancy, confiscation notice would be issued and in it would be mentioned that this is the discrepancy, therefore it is presumed that it is with the intention to evade payment of tax and therefore the goods are liable for confiscation. Once that confiscation notice was issued, even if I become ready to pay the tax and penalty, the authority would not release the goods. It would say, no, you pay the tax, penalty as well as fine in lieu of confiscation. If we do the arithmetic, it came to some 154% of the value of goods. So no assessee would become ready to make that payments and ultimately it would lead to a petition before the court. So High Court decided to settle this issue. Before the High Court, multiple arguments were taken. One argument was that look, 129 subsection 6 says that if and only if tax and penalty under 129 are not paid, then confiscation proceedings under 130 can be initiated. So unless and until he fulfills or follows all the procedure as stipulated in 129, he ought not to have gone straight to 130. Second, even considering the scheme of the Act and considering the quantum of tax, penalty, etc. stipulated in 129, that should be the view taken. The contra-argument of the government was, the principal argument being that look at both the provisions. Both provisions start with a non-obstant clause. both have a notwithstanding clause. So both have to be harmoniously interpreted, and therefore it cannot be held that 130 cannot be straightaway invoked. High Court took a view that such submission of the state is right because both the provisions have a notwithstanding clause. Therefore, we cannot hold that under no circumstances confiscation proceedings cannot be straightaway initiated. However, the High Court also took a view that we will make sure that it does not happen that in every case, for every default, 130 proceedings are initiated, because that would make 129 redundant. So High Court takes a view that you may go to 130 straight away, but not on the basis of presumptions. Only if there is concrete evidence on record that it is a transaction for evading tax, only then 130 would be straight away permitted. Otherwise, you will have to go to 129. In fact, in a short concurring judgment by the second judge on the bench, he observed that this is a typical situation where for the same contravention, two provisions are there and there are many overlaps between the two provisions, and therefore the legislature should consider amending the provision. Now, in the last budget, there is an amendment proposed. One of the amendments being that notwithstanding clause, the non-obstant clause in section 130, that is proposed to be deleted. So now, according to me, there will be a fresh round, there will be a fresh controversy, whether this judgment in Synergy Fertichem, taking a view that 130 proceedings can be straight away invoked, whether that will continue to hold the field even after that amendment is approved. That is still to receive presidential assent, but once it does so, again this interesting issue will arise. But according to me, ideally, this situation should have been avoided right from the beginning. It cannot be, if we take a simple example of a traffic violation by any of us, and if the authority, if the traffic police has two options to levy 100 rupees and levy 500 rupees of fine, obviously he will go for the 500 rupees fine. So, such situations have arisen only because there is a slight defect in the legislature, because of the fact that ultimately GST was an amalgam of many laws, and therefore they borrowed provisions from different laws. In fact, under the VAT law, there was no concept of confiscation at all. This concept of confiscation is borrowed from the customs. It was earlier used to be limited to smuggling cases. It was never applicable for movement within the country. But because provisions from different statutes came to be borrowed, 129 from VAT laws, 130 from customs laws, this issue has arisen. That is why I say that the judgment would interpret and develop the law. This would be a clear case where the judge would be required to iron out the crease and hold that under what circumstances 129 to be applied, under what circumstances 130 to be applied. But according to me, after the budgetary amendment is passed, again an interesting issue will arise. For the time being, still it is at the discretion of the authority. Although the High Court holds that on presumption basis you don't go to 130, if he does go to 130, then you will have to fight it out in litigation. Ideally, as per the High Court judgment as of today, mere discrepancy in the document is not sufficient for invoking 130. Discrepancy in document, you have to go to 129. Only if it is a serious case of evasion, only in such circumstances, 130 proceedings would be justified. In fact, I will give you an example, a fit case where 130 should be invoked. In a case from Morbi, a unit wanted to probably evade tax. Some 18 conveyances were moving. They were stopped. Both the bill and e-way bill was in order, which it was found with the vehicle. Authority investigated the e-way bill. The supplier who was supposedly transferring the goods, they further inquired he was already dead 3 months prior to that movement. So some X person had taken registration on the basis of Y person and he was moving goods. That could be a clear case of 130. But simpliciter, non-availability of a particular document here and there, that should ideally be a case under 129 and should invite only tax and penalty under 129. So this was the first judgment on practical utility. Second judgment on power of arrest. In fact, there are a line of judgments on this of different high courts. Still the issue is at large before the Supreme Court. Now, here the question is, if we look at again the VAT Act, there was a power of prosecution with the authority. But the authority did not have power to arrest. So if suppose there was a case of evasion and the authority wanted to punish the assessee, he could lodge a complaint or an FIR with the police station and the police could take necessary action in the matter. Under the GST law, there is a specific provision giving power of arrest to the GST authority contained in section 69. Now, if we look at section 69, it says if the officer has reason to believe that any of the offenses which are mentioned in that section is committed and the value of evasion is more than 2.5 crores, then the authority has power to arrest that individual. So, practically what happens is, in any big case, the authority comes to the premises under search under section 67. He says that according to me, the amount which you have evaded is more than 2.5 crores. Nowadays, given the turnover of companies, 2.5 crores is not a very big amount from the perspective of businesses. Even some unintentional contravention could lead to a liability in crores. That is not very unseen nowadays. So authority would come, he would say that no, according to me, you are evading tax more than 2.5 crores rupees. We will arrest you, you pay the tax upfront. So the issue which was coming up was, we don't get a show cause notice, we don't get any opportunity of hearing, we don't get opportunity to participate in assessment, adjudication, etc. Straight away, under the search proceedings, the authority comes to the premises and says that no, you are an evader, either pay upfront or we'll put you in jail. So again, because this issue became widespread, petitions were filed before various high courts. Now here there are certain conflicting judgments. Madras High Court in Jayachandran Alloys Private Limited 2019 76 GSTR 329 takes a view that this power of arrest can be exercised only after that factum of evasion is established. Now how do you establish that evasion? By assessment. So Madras High Court takes a very aggressive view. It says that only if that evasion is established by way of assessment, then arrest under section 69 is permissible. This judgment is disagreed by the Gujarat High Court. In the case of Vimal Goswami versus State of Gujarat, SCA 13679 of 2019. Gujarat High Court takes a view that according to us, the scheme does not suggest that of assessment is necessary for arrest. So even without assessment, there can be an arrest. It, however, says that that power is to be used sparingly, it should not be used as a tool to harass, etc. But we all know that these are things on paper. When it comes to practical implementation, it will always be difficult. So, but Gujarat High Court takes a view that assessment is not required. In a given case, the authority can come to the premises, and if he has reason to believe that the tax evaded is more than that stipulated amount, in such case, there can be an arrest. Of course, there is a detailed judgment on how reason to believe is to be interpreted. It is settled law under income tax, under various statutes, that reason to believe cannot be mere suspicion. There has to be certain cogent material available on record. But if it is available on record, then even without assessment, the arrest is permissible. That is what the Gujarat High Court says. According to me, the most pertinent or the judgment which is most aptly laying down the law on the subject is that of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in the case of Akhil Krishnan Magu, 2020, 80 GSTR 299. So, Telangana says, under no circumstances without assessment arrest. Gujarat says that no, we don't see any such restriction in the scheme, you can arrest. Punjab and Haryana High Court says that we will give meaning or we will give some logic to the provision. What we will hold is that you can arrest without assessment only in very peculiar circumstances. Like, suppose it is evasion of a very huge amount, a very huge scam, or if the assessee is not appearing before the authority despite repeated summons, or if the assessee is a habitual offender, or if he is likely to flee the country, or if he is only found there is concrete evidence that he is the one who is only issuing the bills, not doing any sort of business. Only in such circumstances the power to arrest without assessment should be exercised. In case of businesses, so if it is found that it is a valid, genuine business, and in the course of his business, if the authority is believing that there is some transaction, there are some transactions which are either unreported or which are leading to evasion of tax, then such businessmen should not be arrested without a proper adjudication, assessment, notice, hearing. So, according to me, Punjab and Haryana High Court goes on the right track, in the right direction. It says that if it is found during the course of search that there is business activity taking place at the premises, the person is a businessman, on the basis of certain records, etc., if there is allegation of evasion, you may proceed to assess, adjudicate, etc. Ultimately, if he is found to be evading that tax, you can always arrest. But in cases of businessmen, you should not jump to arrest without providing opportunity of hearing. All this again will be settled by the Supreme Court. Already some matters are there before the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court will declare the law on the subject under Article 141. But for the time being, insofar as Gujarat is concerned, that Gujarat High Court judgment binds. So today we will not be able to simply tell the authority that no, you cannot arrest me. On facts of the case, we can say that you don't have reason to believe this is not a case of evasion. That is completely different. But on law, you cannot say that no, there is no assessment which has taken place, so you go away, you cannot arrest me. That is how the law is there in Gujarat. For the time being, Madras law would be that they will not be in a position to arrest. Punjab and Haryana High Court has laid down certain valid guidelines for the purpose of exercising that power of arrest. So this was the set of a couple of judgments regarding practical difficulty in day-to-day affairs. Now we come to a set of judgments on input tax credit. Now input tax credit has always been a contested issue, may it be central excise, may it be value-added tax, or may it be GST. Ultimately, every SSE pays a huge chunk of his tax through the credit ledger, and therefore the admissibility or otherwise of the credit is always an issue. Now what I propose to do is, I will discuss two judgments of the Supreme Court, and then we will step by step discuss certain judgments of different high courts and try to find out that what is the law emerging from a collective reading of these judgments. First judgment which we may refer to is Union of India versus Mohit Minerals Private Limited, 2018 58 GSTR 1, Supreme Court. Now the issue before the court in this case was that under the service tax regime also on coal, there was a clean energy cess which was levied. When the GST came into the picture, there were certain items on which the GST compensation cess was imposed. One of them being coal. So a situation arose where if suppose that coal was in stock, the clean energy cess had already been paid under the earlier law. Still, when that coal was supplied under the GST regime, this compensation cess was required to be paid again. There was no provision enabling credit of that clean energy cess against the GST compensation cess. So before the Supreme Court, the very validity of the Cess Compensation Act was challenged. The challenge was on multiple grounds. One, cess is without competence. The parliament does not have competence to impose the tax. Cess and GST cannot be imposed simultaneously on the same transactions, etc. The argument which I propose to highlight is, one of the argument was that it leads to double taxation. No credit of the clean energy cess is given against the compensation cess, and therefore that levy of compensation cess is bad in law. Supreme Court upheld the Cess Act on all grounds. While dealing with this argument regarding non-grant of set-off under the earlier law towards liability under the GST law, Supreme Court took a view that whether or not to grant the credit is the prerogative of the legislature. It is part of legislative policy. If legislature says that no, I don't want to give credit of that clean energy cess against the compensation cess, then you have to live by that legislative policy. We cannot hold that no, because it leads to double taxation, you are mandatorily required to give credit of that compensation cess. Similarly, in the case of ALD Automotive Private Limited, 2019-13 SCC 225, again, question of input tax credit. There was a provision which imposed a time limit for claim of input tax credit. That provision under the VAT law, under the Tamil Nadu VAT Act, that was challenged on multifarious grounds. One of the grounds being that that credit is a vested right. If I am otherwise on merits admissible or eligible to claim that credit, then by way of a provision, time limit cannot be imposed, and even if that time limit is imposed, it is to be read as directory, and if at a belated stage I come to know that I am entitled to credit, I should be granted that credit. Again, Supreme Court rejects this argument and takes a view, as I said in Mohit Minerals, that whether or not to grant input tax credit is legislative policy. If the legislature feels that we don't want to allow old credits, if it would become difficult to verify those old credits, and therefore if it puts up a time limit for claiming input tax credit, there is nothing wrong in this provision, and therefore the Supreme Court takes a view that even a provision which imposes a time limit for claiming input tax credit is valid in law. So this is a line of there are 2-3 more judgments which are on similar lines. So Supreme Court has now taken a firm view that whether or not to grant input tax credit is for the legislature to decide. If suppose tomorrow the parliament says that we want to delete section 16 and 17 altogether, forget about our policy of cascading effect, etc. We don't want to, there are a lot of scams going on, we don't want to grant a single rupee of credit. Each assessee pay tax at multiple stages on the full value. Still, according to me, the court might say that, look, it is for them to decide. Even under the earlier sales tax regime, there was no provision for input tax credit. Still, the levy survived. So, whether or not to grant that input tax credit is the prerogative of the legislature. We are not going into economic theories where the economist would say that that is contrary to the very purpose or very scheme of the GST law, etc. From an economic point of view, they may be right that that would not be in sync with the purpose of implementing GST. That would lead to cascading effect. Very well. But still, the court has said that whether or not to grant credit under law is the prerogative of the legislature. However, these judgments come with a caveat. And that is where we will analyze now some certain High Court judgments and see whether they are in sync with this line of argument or this line of reasoning by the Supreme Court that granting of input tax credit is legislative prerogative. The first judgment which we analyze is Philco Trade Center Private Limited versus Union of India, a Gujarat High Court judgment. In the context of section 140 subsection 3 of the GST law. Now the issue at hand here was that there were certain dealers who under the earlier erstwhile excise law were entitled to credit of tax paid on inputs. Further, there was no condition under the excise law that those particular goods are to be sold off within a particular period. On 1/7/2017, when the GST law was enforced, while granting credit of tax paid under the earlier regime in such cases, in section 140 subsection 3, a condition was imposed that the goods which are lying in stock should not be older than 1 year. They should have been purchased within 1 year from the date of implementation of the GST law. So what happened was that for people who had stock of goods, maybe some old stock also on hand, tax was paid on those goods. The credit was shown, it was claimed in the returns filed under the earlier law. With effect from 1/7/2017, the parliament says that no, you forget that credit. We are saying that if it is beyond a period of 1 year, we will not give you the credit. This provision was challenged before the High Court. The principal argument being that credit in this case had already been granted. This was not a case of new grant of credit by the legislature. Credit was already available under the earlier law. By making such a provision, a retrospective effect is given to the provision in as much as the credit which was already available is suddenly wiped off. So question was whether retrospective withdrawal of credit already given, whether that is permissible or not. In such circumstances, the Gujarat High Court took a view that retrospective legislation without any valid reason, that is not permitted. Credit once already granted becomes an indefeasible right. So that is where we need to draw a distinction. Whether credit is already granted and it is sought to be taken back, because if credit is already granted, I have arranged my affairs in the manner that the credit is available. While determining my sale price, etc., I would not have taken into consideration that element because under law credit was admissible. Now suddenly you come up and say that no, forget that credit, we are taking back that credit. So High Court takes a view that such retrospective withdrawal of credit is not permissible, it is a vested right and therefore that provision is bad in law. Of course, that is now pending before the Supreme Court. Second judgment, Siddharth Enterprises Private Limited versus Union of India relating to transitional credit. Again, section 140 permitted transiting of the credit. Under section 140, there was no provision which required that form Tran 1 was to be filed within a particular period. By way of rule, the government said that no, you file the Tran 1 within a particular period, only then we will allow you the credit. Gujarat High Court takes a view that that credit is a vested right. It was already claimed under the earlier law. Even the GST law did not impose any time limit for claiming that credit, transiting that credit into GST law. It was a statutory right. It was protected by Article 300 capital A of the Constitution. And therefore, we will say that that rule is directory in nature. Merely because Tran 1 is not filed within time, you cannot deny benefit of admissible credit. Again, according to me, this is a case where credit is available in law. And the question is whether by way of a subordinate legislation that credit can be curtailed or not. In such circumstance, the High Court says that no, it is directory and therefore the credit should be admissible. In fact, according to me, this is further supplemented by the Delhi High Court judgment in Brand Equity Treaties Limited 2020-77 GSTR 390. According to me, it is a very well written judgment where the court analyzes that look at the circumstances under which such issue has arisen. In 2017, when GST law was implemented in July, no one was clear of what the provision is, what actually, how the mechanism works. There were n number of glitches on the portal. So, considering the circumstances, we will not allow losing of valuable right only because a certain form was not filed in time. In fact, the Delhi High Court also notices that the government came out with a notification saying that if there is a technical glitch, then we will extend the time limit. Delhi High Court says that on what basis do you determine whether there is a technical glitch or not? Can we allow the citizens to remain on the whims of the authority, on the whims of the GSTN and determine whether it is a technical glitch or not? We will not allow such arbitrary discrimination. Once the government accepts that there were glitches during the initial implementation of the regime, then the SSE should be allowed to take that credit if it is taken within that reasonable time limit. And merely by strictly interpreting that rule, we will not allow the SSEs to lose the credit. In fact, Delhi High Court made a general declaration that we will not apply this judgment only to the people who have come before us. We will say that anyone who has yet not claimed the credit, if he claims it within 3 years from 1/7/2017, we will direct the government to give the credit. Again, this judgment before the Supreme Court will decide. But according to me, these judgments on transitional credit cannot be said to be contrary to the ruling of Supreme Court in Mohit Minerals or ALD Automotive, etc. In these cases, the High Court has not said that no legislature has to grant credit. High Court has in typical circumstances said that once that credit has been granted, then the citizens should be allowed to enjoy that credit. And by making arbitrary discriminations, by making harsh rules, mandatory rules, we will not allow the lapsing of such credit. So these are two or three judgments which I feel are still in line with that law declared by the Supreme Court. I will give an example of a judgment which according to me is not in accordance with the law declared by the Supreme Court, which is by Orissa High Court in Safari Retreats Private Limited 2019-67 GSTR 16. Before the Orissa High Court, a builder went who had constructed a shopping mall. The shopping mall, the showrooms were to be given on rent. Argument of the builder was that look, I have to pay GST on the rent which I will charge from the renting of those showrooms. How can the legislature deny the credit of the inputs or the materials which I have used in constructing the shopping mall? Because if you look at section 17, there is a specific provision which says that if the goods or services are used in construction of an immovable property, then credit is not admissible. Orissa High Court reads down that provision and says that no, because you are liable to pay output tax on the rent which is to be charged on renting of the showroom, we will hold that you are entitled to input tax credit despite there being such a statutory provision. With all due respect, according to me, this is not a correct law. This is not the correct judgment. For people who are relying on this judgment and taking credit, they will have to face difficulties in future. Already the matter is before the Supreme Court, and according to me, there is very less chance that such a view can be sustained. Because as I said, there is a long line of judgments, long line of cases of the Supreme Court taking the view that whether or not to grant the credit is the prerogative of the legislature. So now if legislature in its wisdom says that even if you have to pay tax on your output liability on your rent, we will not grant credit on the construction material, then that is the end of the matter. You cannot question the wisdom of the legislature and says that no, it leads to double taxation, so kindly grant me input tax credit. That is not what the law which is declared by the Supreme Court. So according to me, this Orissa High Court judgment, there is some lacuna in it, and it is contrary to the law laid down by the Supreme Court. And the last in this series of input tax credit is again a recent pronouncement of Gujarat High Court in the case of SS Industries versus Union of India, SCA number 8841 of 2020, decided on 24th December 2020. Now the subject matter of challenge in this particular case was blocking of input tax credit under Rule 86 capital A of the GST rules. Now, Rule 86 capital A of the GST rules empowers the authority to block credit in cases where it has reason to believe that that credit is false based on only bills without movement of goods, etc. So, there is a list of circumstances given where if the authority has reason to believe that the credit falls within that criteria, then even prior to assessment, prior to adjudication, the authority can block that credit in my credit ledger. Now, again before the High Court, the argument of the SSE was that look, credit is a vested right available to me, it should be granted to me. How can the authority block that credit which is in law available to me? High Court again takes a view that relying on a judgment of Osaram Surya of the Supreme Court, which is again in sync with ALD Automotive and Mohit Minerals. High Court takes a view that unless and until the legislature grants the credit, it is not a vested right. Look at section 16. Section 16 subsection 2 contains conditions for claim of credit. The principal condition being that you should have received the goods actually. It should not be a mere bill. There should be actual receipt of goods or services. If on the basis of cogent material there is reason to believe that that credit is fictitious, that credit is contrary to the provision, then we will not hold that that credit is a vested right, and therefore the rule making authority has the power to frame such rule. Of course, it clarifies that in a particular paragraph that the validity of the rule is not under challenge. But in effect, if we read the judgment, indirectly the High Court has upheld the validity. High Court has taken a view that in such circumstances, we will not hold that it is a vested right, and therefore the authority can block the credit if they wish to do so. So, according to me, a reading of these judgments makes the law very clear, unless of course the Supreme Court changes its view in some case, that is a different story. Otherwise, for the time being, one, credit can be granted only by the legislature. You cannot force the legislature to grant the credit. Two, if the credit is already granted and if it is a valid credit, and if the legislature seeks to withdraw that benefit, then you can contend before the court that you should be allowed the benefit of that credit. So this takes care of that section on input tax credit, that the group of judgments. I move to another judgment, again slightly linked to credit, which is in the context of liability of interest under section 50 of the GST law. The judgment is by Telangana High Court in the case of Mega Engineering and Infrastructure Limited, 2019 65 GSTR 164. Now the issue which arose in that case and in fact across the country was that suppose an SSE files belated returns. As per the return, there is tax liability of say 100 rupees. As per the return, 90 rupees credit is admissible to the SSC, while 10 rupees of tax is to be paid through the cash ledger. The authorities took a view that interest is leviable on the entire 100 rupees. This particular stand of the authorities was challenged before the Telangana High Court. Telangana High Court upholds the view of the authority. Telangana High Court takes a view that the tax credit is in possession of the SSC till it is utilized towards the discharge of output tax liability. So it is as such an asset of the SSC. Just because there is credit, you cannot escape from the charge of interest, and therefore we hold that interest is leviable on the gross tax liability. Now, of course, we have a budgetary amendment likely to be approved retrospectively, which says that in case of belated returns, the interest is imposable only on the net tax liability. So probably to that extent, the law will now become clear once that amendment is passed. Why I propose to discuss this judgment is, the issue will still remain in cases where the liability is imposed under assessment proceedings or under section 73 or 74. Because if we look at the proposed budgetary amendment, that applies only to cases other than those involving 73, 74. So, if suppose on my own, I file the return belatedly, then if the amendment comes into force, the liability of interest will only be on that net tax portion which is paid through cash. The whatever tax is paid through credit ledger, there will be no interest liability. But that amendment will not take care of situations where there is assessment adjudication under 73, 74. So suppose today I receive a notice under section 73 saying that I paid tax on a particular commodity at 5%, according to the authority the tax is payable at 18%. I agree to that proposition. I said that no, I committed a bona fide error and so I am liable to pay 18%. But today in my electronic credit ledger, I already have that amount which is sufficient to meet that liability. The authority will not accept that payment and it will still demand interest, because the proposed amendment to section 50 does not cover cases of 73 and 74. So authority will still rely on this mega engineering of Telangana High Court and take a stand that no, credit may be with you, you have never till date utilized the credit, and therefore we will impose interest on that liability even though you are discharging that entire liability through the credit ledger. According to me, that view requires serious reconsideration. In fact, under the VAT law, there is a Gujarat High Court judgment in State of Gujarat versus Jai Steel Tube and Traders, 2015, 80 VST 530 Gujarat, where the Gujarat High Court takes a view that if there is sufficient input tax credit balance, then there is no question of imposition of interest and penalty. So according to me, that situation would survive even under the GST law. If I have credit balance in the credit ledger, that would mean that my supplier has already paid that tax into the government treasury. In fact, that is one of the conditions for eligibility of credit. Under sections, they have paid the tax into the government treasury. So the moment I discharge my liability using that credit balance, that has to relate back to that date when my supplier paid the tax. There is no loss of revenue to the government because the supplier had already paid the tax earlier. Again, there are a series of judgments to the effect that the very object of interest provision is to compensate the union or the state for belated payment. Now, in a case where there is no loss of revenue to the union or state because of availability of balance in the electronic credit ledger, according to me, interest is not payable. But this the authority will not accept, particularly because now the proviso clarifies. The new budgetary amendment, it clarifies that we will say that interest is payable on net portion only if it is otherwise than by way of 73 or 74. So authority may say that look, proviso gives a specific benefit, otherwise section 50 you are liable to it. High Court was the first judgment on the issue. Carco Power versus State of Haryana, I will have to give the citations of the case, which took a view that even if your output commodity is under GST, that does not debar your purchase of raw materials under CST against CFOM declaration. The objection of the states was that because your output liability is under GST, you are not liable to pay any tax under the Central Sales Tax Act. Therefore, you are not liable for registration under the Central Sales Tax Act. Therefore, you cannot purchase against CFOM declaration. Punjab and Haryana High Court did not accept such contention, and it took a view that you can purchase against CFOM declaration. The SLP filed by the state of Punjab against this judgment was dismissed by the Supreme Court. Thereafter, following this Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment, there were some 8 other High Courts taking the same view, all in favor of SSE, including the Gujarat High Court, taking the view that merely because you are registered under the GST law, that does not debar your purchase under CST against CFOM declaration. One of the judgments was Madras High Court judgment in Ramco Cements Limited. So, till I would say last month, according to me, the situation was settled. Punjab Haryana High Court taking a view that CST purchase against CFOM declaration is possible. SLP against that Punjab Haryana High Court being dismissed by the Supreme Court. 8 other High Courts taking the same view, and no High Court taking an adverse view. Last month, Supreme Court, while considering the SLP against Madras High Court, issues notice and it stays the Madras High Court judgment. So now, according to me, again the issue is at large. The Supreme Court on the previous occasion itself had declined to entertain the SLP, but it was simple SLP dismissal. Again, it is settled principle that SLP dismissal is not a declaration of law under Article 142. Therefore, if the Supreme Court simply in a one-liner says that SLP dismissed, that does not mean that the High Court judgment merges with the Supreme Court and it is a declaration of law by the Supreme Court. It only means that the Supreme Court refused to interfere in the facts and circumstances of the case. So, Supreme Court is very well entitled to have a relook into the issue. But again, ideally it should not have done so when already all High Courts have taken a consistent similar view. Already the rights equities have been crystallized based on the views taken by the High Court. Now by re-interference by the Supreme Court, again as I said, the ball is before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court ultimately says that no, we disagree with all the High Courts and we take a view that you cannot make the purchase against CFOM, then again that will become binding. For the time being, therefore, the issue again becomes alive, the issue which had already been closed by a number of High Court judgments. Next, again interesting issue, I deal with the Bombay High Court judgment in the case of JSW Energy Limited versus Union of India, 2019-69 GSTR 122 Bombay. Now this was a writ petition which was filed against an order of the AAAR, the Appellate Authority for Advanced Ruling, because there is no appeal provided under the law against an order of AAAR. Bombay High Court takes a very conservative view of the matter and says that merely because no appeal is provided under the law, we cannot become the court of appeal, so we will not entertain our writ jurisdiction in such cases. So this, according to me, is a very dangerous proposition. Ordinarily, it is well accepted across the High Courts that writ jurisdiction is a very wide jurisdiction. Under Article 226, High Court has a very wide power, and therefore, if suppose I do not have alternative remedy against an order, High Court ordinarily would entertain a writ petition. Bombay High Court, the view which is taken by Bombay High Court is in fact the classic view taken by English courts when where these writs originated, the writ of certiorari or writ of mandamus, etc., where the English courts had taken a view that a writ of certiorari is a writ when an order is challenged before a higher forum. Writ of certiorari would lie only if the order is found to be without jurisdiction or in breach of principles of natural justice. In a writ proceeding, it cannot be converted into an appeal proceeding. That was the view of the British courts. In fact, Supreme Court in T.C. Basappa versus T. Nagappa, AIR 1954, Supreme Court 440, while examining this concept of writs, etc., way back in the year 1954, had observed that our articles, Article 226, Article 132, Article 32, etc. of the Constitution, give a very wide jurisdiction to the High Court and the Supreme Court. And therefore, that traditional view of British courts may not apply. So, according to me, the only reason for discussing this judgment is that if, suppose that gets followed by other high courts, or if it gets affirmed by the Supreme Court under any circumstances, then under no circumstances we can afford of going for advance ruling. We are very well aware that advance ruling authority being a departmental authority, in more than 90% of the cases, the ruling is against the SSE. Generally, advance ruling application is filed with an understanding that we might have to litigate. If the doors get closed at AAAR, then it would be extremely hazardous for the SSEs. Fortunately, this is a singular judgment given by a bench of Bombay High Court. At least insofar as Gujarat is concerned, the petitions against the AAARs are maintained. Even otherwise, even under the old law, where suppose in revision there was no appeal against revision, writs used to be filed against revision orders. Even under the central excise, I am told that against the revision order of the government, the High Court ordinarily accepts the writ petitions. So according to me, that should be the correct position, but there is a singular judgment of the Bombay High Court which takes a view that we will not entertain a writ petition against AAAR. It becomes final because there is no appeal provided under the statute. I believe we are almost out of time, so I will just conclude with one last judgment. Again, very important from the perspective of practical implementation of the law. Although in the context of the Delhi VAT Act, but I thought I should discuss this judgment while we are analyzing the implications of the GST law. The judgment is in the case of Arise India Limited, writ petition 2106 of 2015, decided on 26th October 2017. Again, input tax credit. Issue was whether credit can be denied to the buyer on the basis that the seller has not paid the tax into the government treasury. So, fact is that I have made a bona fide purchase, a genuine transaction. The seller has not deposited tax on that transaction into the government treasury. The legislature enacts a provision saying that no, because tax has not gone into the government treasury, therefore we will not grant you credit. Of course, here, as I suggested, the line of judgment saying that credit is the prerogative of the legislature, that would be against us. But Delhi High Court takes a view that such a provision is violating my fundamental right of equality under Article 14. So, legislature may be competent to enact such a provision, but the provision, there is a difference between legislative competence and violation of fundamental rights under Part 3 of the Constitution. So, a legislature may be competent to enact a provision, but the court of law, the constitutional court, has the power to test the provision and hold whether it is violating any fundamental right of the citizen or not. So, Delhi High Court takes a view that you cannot discriminate amongst bona fide purchasers. Suppose A and B both are bona fide purchasers, both have made valid purchases. The supplier of A deposits the tax into the treasury, the supplier of B does not deposit the tax into the treasury. You cannot differentiate between the two. Ultimately, the default which is being made is by the seller. You cannot penalize a bona fide buyer for the default made by the seller. So Delhi High Court takes a view that such a provision is arbitrary, discriminatory, and therefore it reads down the provision and says that if it is a bona fide transaction, then credit cannot be disallowed on the basis of non-payment of tax by the supplier. Now, there is a similar provision contained under the GST law in section 16 subsection 2 clause C, which again says that if the seller has not paid the tax into the government treasury, then credit is not admissible to the buyer. In fact, this is one of the most common issues faced by most of the SSEs, because someone or the other from his list of suppliers will be held to be bogus or will have defaulted in making payment of tax, and the authority will come to you to demand that tax. So now only time will tell whether this provision under GST law is valid or not, because as of today there is no Gujarat High Court judgment taking any view in favor of the SSE. There is a Delhi High Court judgment. SLP against the Delhi High Court judgment is dismissed. But as I said, it is a simpliciter dismissal of SLP, not a declaration of law under Article 141. In fact, there is a contrary judgment of the Bombay High Court in the context of Maharashtra Value Added Tax Act, where Bombay High Court has upheld such a provision. Again, SLP by the SSE before the Supreme Court, that is also dismissed. So Bombay High Court judgment also stands affirmed by the Supreme Court. The Delhi High Court judgment also stands affirmed by the Supreme Court. But in both cases, they are only simpliciter dismissals of SLP. So this issue is still at large. Gujarat will decide, maybe other states will decide. Ultimately, if Supreme Court decides to intervene in a matter and lays down the law on this subject, then we will get to know that whether such a provision is valid or not. According to me, there is some good valid ground available to us to say that if it is a bona fide transaction, credit cannot be disallowed. But I would not say it is a very strong proposition, because government might say that how do we distinguish between a bona fide and a non-bona fide person? If the seller has not paid the tax, how do we determine whether the buyer was in collusion with the seller or not? So the government is likely to put up such a stand before the courts, and only time will tell ultimately how the provision is determined by the authority. So with this, because now I am told that there is already another session which is to take place, I will just end with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which says, "There is a higher court than courts of justice, and that is the court of conscience. It supersedes all other courts." So I will say that if the SSE as well as the taxing authority develop this conscience, then we will not require this litigation, and probably half of the judgments would be avoided. So with this, I end my session. Thank you all for a very patient hearing.
Thank you, Advocate Uchit Sheth, for your very insightful talk. At this juncture, we would like to felicitate the committee members once again in this session, and I would request Advocate Uchit Sheth, sir, to kindly do the honors, starting with Advocate Tejas Shah, sir. Followed by Advocate Sunil Keshwani. Let's have the applause going for all the committee members, followed by Advocate Barish Joshi. Followed by Hiren Patel, sir. Followed by Mr. Bhavesh Gulwani. And finally, Mr. Ashok Makwana. Let's hear it once again for everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you for doing the honors. I would request the dignitaries on the dais and off the dais to kindly come forward for a group photo.